All right, welcome back to our discussion here of business analytics that are used at CableCom. And so I'm going to move into my next slide here called BI processes. And so I'm going to talk about the different kind of high-level processes that were in use at CableCom to do their business intelligence. So there's really three. There's prediction, clustering, and kind of the sequential relationships. So prediction maybe goes without saying a little bit. I've already talked about this being predictive analytics, so maybe that's pretty obvious. CableCom wanted to understand future customer behavior. So they used past behavior and then predicted. And they had, like I said, kind of the key was identifying all those different churn factors and then putting them through their algorithms and understanding which ones predicted what. So what kinds of customers that had, these 30 or 40 factors together, what did that mean for them in 5 months? And were they likely to leave? And then also based on different categories, how important were they? And so that kind of moves me into my next one, which is clustering. So customers categorized by behavior, attitude, and demographics. So you can really, so again, just other ways to combine groups of customers and understand how you're going to react to the data you're getting. And then sequential relationships. So that may have been the key to this whole thing, is understanding that you had this dissatisfaction point maybe around 9 months, and you had this then at 12 to 14 months, people churning and customers leaving your customers leaving your company, and understanding that time-ordered relationship, that if you got them around 7 months, how successful they could be in flipping those customers and keeping them at your company. So I'm going to go to the next slide here, and the next couple slides, I'm first on the one called IBM SPSS, but we're going to talk about the software, and then I'll move into the data a little bit. So the SPSS package, predictive analytics technology, was chosen. I'm going to talk about why, or a little bit about why CableCom did and what they chose. So one of the big reasons is that it integrated data from various sources. I talked about that, and I'm going to talk about data a little more in a moment. And that's probably not all that uncommon for data warehousing, data mining type of software, but it was pretty easy for them to do, and it overcame a technical challenge that they had data coming from all these different places, and they could easily pull it into one location and analyze it there. And I think maybe another key they really found was there was this small initial investment that could be scaled later. So they started off with a team. If you remember, I said there were only 2 people, and they actually just had one workstation that had this software on it. So before the organization had seen all the benefits of business intelligence, they were able to kind of try it out for relatively little investments. They don't have software deployed everywhere, and and they're not completely relying on this company wide. And as they kept moving forward and finding all the benefits and expanding from 2 to 15 people, then they ultimately had this software on a couple different server machines and 15 different clients, one for each of those employees accessing the data. So they really were scaling up this process later, and they were able to do that pretty easily with the SPSS software. So the software packages they used, they had base statistics and Clementine that I mentioned earlier were used for data mining. So those were a lot of the diving into the data was done, a lot of the end user stuff. They had data collection technology in SPSS for survey administrations. That was a big way they were collecting data about their customers, and they were able to kind of tie that right in. And then obviously when you're using that software, it's easy to get the data into the back-end data warehouse because it's all tied together. They had a product called Dimensions that they used for customer survey research. So that was how they're really looking into that customer data and pulling insights out of it. They also had a product called SPSS text mining they're using to analyze some of the different data types they're getting and kind of pulling that into a database. Since we've talked about in class how hard it is to pull data that isn't already in some kind of relational normalized store. You're pulling this big data, this textual data, and how do you actually get actionable insight off of that and slice it and dice it to make decisions. So moving into my next slide here on the back-end data. So there's really 2 main areas where they were storing data, 2 repositories, if you will. One was an Oracle data warehouse. So they pulled data. This was kind of their big or master location for all their data. They're pulling data from call center. That's textual data that maybe a call center operator is typing in, as well as IVR audio data. So IVR integrated voice recordings, just pulling that all that audio information in. There's something called a CDR, a call detail record, which is converted into text. That was everything that transpired on a call. And then they had demographic data about their customers, and they also had some externally purchased data. And this data got updated in this Oracle data warehouse anywhere from daily to weekly, depending on the source. So some of it quicker than other data, obviously, but you could be assured that you were looking at data that was at most 1 week old. So that's where I guess the majority of the data was. But the marketing team specifically had their own data mart on SQL Server as well. So remember we talked about data warehouses kind of being big, data marts being slightly smaller, or kind of subset usually of what a data warehouse is. And the key here was enabling flexibility. So marketing had their own data source. And there wasn't a lengthy change request process, or what they perceived as a lengthy change request process. If they needed some schematic changes to that data store, that like if they wanted to do that on the Oracle data warehouse, that was a much more difficult and longer time process. So for them to be nimble and agile, they had their own data mart where they could hack around and make changes as they wanted, and they also had this attitudinal data. Very specifically that they put in there. And so this kind of standardized data plus the marketing specific data was key for them, and they kind of had the second data source as well that they could use. So now I'm going to talk about the benefits they saw from predictive analytics. So kind of, what's the upshot of all this? What benefits did they see? So CableCom was able to identify satisfaction levels in their customers at 78% accuracy is what they said. So for them to be at least gathering 80% of these customers that were looking to leave was key for them, right? They were hitting the vast majority of those people that were very likely to churn right around that year timeline. And they were able to drop the churn rate for those customers from 19 to 2%. So they were losing a fifth of these customers, and all these customers, or most of these customers to some degree, were unhappy. They were losing a lot of them, and dropping that down to the point where they were retaining 98% was key, right? That was a huge impact to their bottom line, keeping those customers and staying profitable. And additionally, right, so that was kind of their main goal, and they really felt they were achieving it with their analytics, right, which is why they were so happy with it. But additionally, they were finding out a lot of data about their customers, a lot more information, and they could even find out, well, who's satisfied and why, and other information about those customers, so they could look for opportunities to upsell. So then they can make their current customers, and especially their customers with high potential lifetime value, they can sell them more and make them into more profitable customers. And one of the keys there also is contacting them at the right times and not too often. So when you have when you're contacting, just blasting information out to customers, for example, and they used to send over 1 million pieces of mail every month, that's very costly, right? And so they're reducing costs by not just blasting that marketing out, and they're much more effective when they're actually sending out the marketing pieces and the pieces of mail, because they know who to contact and when, and they're not turning satisfied customers into less satisfied customers by bothering them too often either. So finding those opportunities to upsell, turning customers into more profitable customers, and then reducing costs in their marketing department, all those things were happening, and made BI really a very successful thing for CableCom. So the last thing to kind of wrap up here are a couple discussion questions. So moving on to the next slide, and really two that I'd want everyone to think about. One is, what other benefits could CableCom derive from its BI systems, right? So we talked about a few. They kind of went with one goal, as we talked about in class, actually have a business goal when you're going into BI. They had a business goal, reduce churn. They were able to do a great job there. But then they started extracting all of these different things, right? These upsell opportunities, these other ways to reduce costs. So my first discussion question would be, what other benefits could CableCom be deriving other than this? What are some other opportunities? And then my last question, or second and last question, will be, what kind of problems could having a data warehouse and a separate data mart pose for CableCom? I thought that was kind of an interesting part of the research, is that they did that. The idea usually with the data warehouse is to have kind of this single version of the truth, and to some degree they decided, well, we want to sacrifice that a little bit in order to have more flexibility in this smaller data mart. But what kind of problems could that cause? Because now they don't really have a single version of the truth, and maybe that inconsistency could cause some issues. Anyways, that's all I got. Thanks for giving this a listen to listening to me talk about business intelligence at CableCom. Thanks a lot.